This was me in 2019. But more interestingly, this was my calendar in 2019. At that time, I was working a full-time job in the finance field, studying 7 days a week for the CFA program, working on this YouTube channel as a side gig, and trying to do all the normal things in life. Now, don't get me wrong, 2019 was one of the best years of my life so far, but it was pretty crazy. The routine that I utilized during this time was intense, but pretty simple. And it allowed me to do all these different things pretty successfully. I passed both of the CFA exams that I studied for during that year, made big steps in my career path, and planted the seeds for what has now become the 814th best finance YouTube channel.
How's it going, good people?
All kidding aside, the primary reason I was able to pass the CFA exams during that time was my commitment to this schedule. And since then, I've seen multiple people and several outlets discuss a schedule like this that's very similar. They too believe that it can be very beneficial to accomplishing goals. We're gonna walk through exactly how this schedule works, showing you the rules and systems that make it so successful. Keep in mind, this is a schedule for a young professional who does have a significant other, but before having kids. I really don't think I could have studied enough to pass all the CFA exams after I had had kids, but I know there are some people out there who do it, so hats off to them. The first thing to do when building an effective schedule is to understand how much total time is needed for the priorities. For me, and I think many of you watching this video, the time you spend working, like in your regular day job, is not negotiable. But that time is also not the main priority that we're working around here. You see, your work hours, they're more set in stone. Sure, they can fluctuate day to day, but what I mean is they feel more required. It feels like that responsibility owns your time more. So we can start there and say, okay, I have to spend between 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every single day commuting to work and working and commuting back home. And 99% of the time, there really isn't gonna be any flexibility there. Now, I consider myself lucky that I work in a job that was usually 40 hours a week, rarely going up north of 45 to 50 hours. And I totally understand that for many of you who work a lot more hours than that, you'll need to push out this next part of your schedule until later on in the evening. But this can still work with that, so stay with me. So if your next priority that you're scheduling is studying, say for the CFA exams, you really need to understand the total amount of hours required for that. We know that the average CFA candidate studies somewhere around 300 hours for each exam. We also know that most candidates will never pass all 3 exams and become a charter holder. You can watch some of my other videos on this topic, but I would say that studying at least 400 hours for each exam is the smartest move if you want to maximize your potential to pass. The reason it's important that you know exactly how many hours you might need to study for any of these CFA exams is because we are also going to prioritize these hours when building the schedule. That's right, we're actually prioritizing 2 totally different things. Finally, the 3rd and 4th and 5th most important things that are probably like hobbies can really take a back seat. But you should still have somewhat of an idea on how many hours are gonna get spent on each of those in any given week. For me, these things were spending time with my wife, playing video games, usually on the weekends, and working on YouTube videos for like 3 flexible hours per week. These things are allowed to be shuffled around into the schedule, but they should still happen on a pretty consistent basis, just to make sure your entire life isn't being consumed by the 2 main priorities. Let's talk about how that prioritization has to happen. You may be watching this going, well, AJ, you just said that work is sort of a priority as it requires most of your time, and that is true. It does require your time, but that doesn't mean you cannot also prioritize something else. It's possible to prioritize 2 things in a schedule if you do it aggressively. And this prioritization is probably the most important part of this scheduling process. Specifically, you need to prioritize studying in this case, just like you prioritize your job. Now that might sound a little bit weird, so hang in there. Remember that we said a job feels required, and probably because it very much is. Well, if you want to pass all 3 CFA exams, so is studying. Studying is not optional, and you are not going to get 500 plus hours per year spent studying if you only do it when you feel like it. And this prioritization is how you make sure it actually happens every single day. Think about it like this. You don't wake up in the morning and wonder if you're gonna put in the effort and energy to get up and get ready and go to work for the day. And why is that? Well, I may sound like a broken record, but it's because work feels like a requirement, and it really is. When something feels like a requirement like that, when you process doing the thing in such a way that there is no other alternative other than to do it, you do it. So whatever that mental framework is around your job, you need to shift your thinking around studying to match it. And there are different ways that you can shift this framework of thinking, so you'll have to figure out what works best for you. But once you can effectively convince yourself that studying is required of you every single day, it'll be much easier to do. There's gonna be no more debate. It's gonna be like getting up in the morning and going to work. It's just something you do no matter what. If you study when you feel like it, and you really don't feel like it, but you know you probably should, you're gonna struggle with it and go back and forth and probably spend 45 minutes not studying, just worrying about, the fact that you should be studying, and it's just stressful, wasted time. But if you understand that studying is required of you, there's no question. You just, time to study, sit down, start studying, get it done. I'll give you a good example. My dad is an auto mechanic, and from as early as I can remember in my childhood, most days when he got home from work, he would sit down at the dinner table, eat dinner with us, finish his plate, scoot it forward, get up and go out to the garage connected to our house and start working on cars again. He fixed other people's cars on the side for extra money, and he would spend probably 3 hours, either 4 or 5 nights a week, for years and years and years on end doing this. I never saw my dad sit at the dinner table for 30 minutes scrolling on Facebook. I never saw my dad pick up a phone call and complain to his friend that he had to go work again, even though he had just gotten back home from a full day of work. He simply said, all right, I'll be out at the shop, got up and went and did it, because in his mind, it was required, just like going to his regular job in the morning. And that is exactly what you will be able to do once you correctly prioritize studying. That is how you're going to pass all of the CFA exams. I mentioned earlier that this schedule can work even if you do have to work in your normal job 60+ hours a week. It will be more strenuous because you're gonna be more tired each day when you get home and start working again on studying, but it's certainly possible. And even though my work schedule was more accommodative or easier, I still did have to work late some nights, and I would often get home at 9 o'clock, eat really quickly, and then study from 9:15 to 12:15 or just after midnight. There just wasn't any question in my mind whether or not I was going to get that done. It was another job that I had. One final example was I had a close family member get injured and was rushed to the hospital, and I made a quick trip there. I left the office at like 4 p.m. that day, drove about an hour and a half to this hospital and visited with my relative until I think 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. that night. I was a level 2 candidate at that time, and I can distinctly remember getting home with my wife at about 1 a.m., pulling my CFA books out of my bag, setting them on our kitchen table, and her asking me if I was seriously going to study right then. But in my mind, there just wasn't any question. It was a requirement. I just sat there from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. and put in my 3 hours. Now, was that the most effective 3 hours ever? No, certainly not. But it was more for me about the principle of the thing, and there just wasn't any way I was not going to study that night. The reason I share both of those examples is just to illustrate that once you appropriately prioritize studying, it makes studying that much easier. It's always gonna happen. Now, all the other things in your schedule that you're not prioritizing but you still wanna get done, like maybe playing video games with friends or going to the gym to work out or whatever it is, they can start to filter in however you really want them to. Because you're gonna know the 2 main priorities are getting done all the time. For me, it was your regular job and then 3 hours every single day, weeknights, in the evenings, weekends, maybe mid-afternoon, typically 3 hours without a beat. If you do something where you work really, really late in banking, let's say, so you cannot study for the CFA exams at all during the week, and so you study 10 hours and 10 hours each day on the weekends, maybe you filter in the other fun things early in the morning on the weekends, middle of the afternoon on the weekends. I don't know, you decide what works for you. The third and final step in this process is just setting your daily time blocks, and this is gonna come down to simple math. You know how many hours a week you have to work your regular job. You know how many hours a week you have to study for whatever it is you're working on. Subtract out the amount of time you have to spend sleeping. Probably also subtract out the amount of time you have to spend doing household chores, because you're gonna have to do laundry or do the dishes at some point. And then whatever you're left with, whether it's 1 hour per week or 10 hours per week, that time is how you're gonna allocate getting the other fun things done. You still wanna have fun from time to time, so your entire life isn't the grind, but you just don't want those fun things to get in the way of the priorities. So filter them in after you know that you're gonna get done the things that you have to. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. Please let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions, if you think this strategy is terrible, if you think this strategy is great. Always open to the feedback. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I very much appreciate that too. Have a good one.